Good morning and welcome. My name is the Reverend Judy Rigby from Airport West Uniting Church. Today, Sunday the 28th of November, is the first Sunday in Advent. It's also the first Sunday in which our worshipping community will be regathering in the building. And so what follows is something of what I've prepared for that service. Thank you for joining us. As we begin, I want to acknowledge that this land is God's land and God's Spirit dwells here. We acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first Australians and traditional custodians of the lands on which we live, learn, work and worship. We pay our respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. And we affirm the commitment of the Uniting Church to work for reconciliation and justice. The call to worship today comes straight from Psalm 25. To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. O my God, in you I trust. Do not let me be put to shame. Do not let those who wait for you be put to shame. Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all day long. May integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait for you. The scriptures of the day include Jeremiah 33, verses 14 to 16, Psalm 25, 1 to 10, and Luke 21, verses 25 to 36. I invite you to pause the video and look these up. On this first Sunday in Advent, at the start of the new Christian calendar year, the third in a cycle of 3, year C, we have a text from the end of the Gospel of Luke in which we hear Jesus predicting strange things happening in creation, involving sun, moon and stars, seas and tides, powers in space driven from their courses. People will be afraid, despairing. It's a terrifying picture. What does this apocalyptic language and its attendant images mean? When will it be? How are we to think about it? If we look at the whole chapter of Luke 21, we'd see that this is only a small portion of a longer discourse, which begins in verse 5 and is rooted in the local politics of the day. Craig Thompson, in his 2018 sermon on this passage, notes that the modern notion of apocalypse has moved considerably from the biblical sense. The word itself in the Bible simply means revelation, although admittedly this doesn't take anything away from the perplexing and terrifying events that are depicted. But contemporary talk of apocalypse points only to the terrifying events and not to the revelation. Think of any apocalyptic movie you've seen or book you've read. Much space is given to the lead up and then the event. The bomb goes off, the biosphere collapses, worlds collide, and then what? Darkness, smoke, dust, a few survivors, end of story, silence. Thompson points out that this is where the difference lies. Though the scale and intensity of the imagery of scriptural apocalyptic literature is great, it doesn't anticipate silence. Scriptural apocalyptic events anticipate a word, an address, a showing forth, something more, revelation. And here I quote from Craig Thompson. The force of the imagery is not violent destruction in itself, not the fire or the storm or the earthquake, but rather pushes to the force of the word to be clearly spoken. This is a world-shaking word, but nonetheless one which the speaker expects will be heard because there will be ears to hear it. The question biblical apocalypse poses then is not how can such things be in the Bible, but what is the word to be heard through them? If God is coming, what are we to anticipate? The answer to this is simply that we wait for the revealing of God's ways, as our psalmist today puts it. And that's the end of the quote. So let's turn to the psalm. Psalm 25 is one of 9 acrostic psalms. Each line corresponds with letters of the Hebrew alphabet, aiding memory retention and giving it a rhythmic sound, even in the English translation. And you might like to try reading it out loud. The psalm also includes a number of recurring words. Shame is one, the writer's own and also that of others. This psalm is both personal and communal. The writer shifts between the two perspectives, praying for himself and for others. The word remembering also reoccurs. The writer petitions God to remember not his own sins and transgressions, but to remember God's own mercy and steadfast love. The writer is aware of the weight of his own sin, but puts it into perspective by setting it alongside the things of God: mercy, love, goodness. Little wonder that the psalmist is prepared to wait for the Lord all day long. And wait, of course, is the other reoccurring word. The writer waits, daily looking up to God, trusting the Lord, who is the one who makes such waiting possible. At the same time, he also petitions God on behalf of all others who wait. It's worth noting here that Psalm 25 is a psalm of lament, coming hard on the heels of a psalm of trust, Psalm 23, and a celebratory liturgy around entering the house of the Lord, Psalm 24, which highlights that prayers of trust and celebration are not enough in the short term to dispel possible shame or fear in times of danger. Waiting for the Lord involves lament as much as trust. Although the season of Advent, unlike Lent, is not a season of repentance, neither is it without lament, which may lead to repentance. The apocalyptic texts at the beginning of Advent, however we interpret them, often find their resonance in current events, as they did in the days of Jesus. The apocalyptic texts at the beginning of Advent, however we interpret them, often find their resonance in current events, as they did in the days of Jesus. Today we find resonances in our post-lockdown, but not post-pandemic, world. In the unfolding climate change disaster, even catastrophe, and perhaps in our own personal sense of apocalypse or disaster. I know, for instance, that John has approached this week's scriptures through the lens of burning pain in his eyes, coming off weeks of emphasis in Mark's gospel about seeing and not seeing, about discernment and where real power lies. The call from today's gospel to stand up and raise his head towards God, to wait on God, is very clear to him and very raw. And I'm saying something here that I know he's saying himself this morning. What is this Advent waiting? It's waiting for the revelation of God, for the inbreaking of God in terms of the parousia, the second coming. We wait for the full revelation of God in the cosmos, as well as in the ordinary, everyday stuff of our lives. And in those places that have the feel of apocalypse, destruction, disaster, the psalmist offers a note of promise. When we engage in this prayerful waiting, we experience the mercy, love, and faithfulness of God in our waiting. Nothing may change externally, but the waiting itself becomes a place of Advent, a place where God comes. Waiting becomes the gift of God. Waiting is a place where we lay out our whole lives to God, trusting them to the Holy One, which is the prayer that's being expressed in this Taizé-like chant from Richard Bruxvoort-Colligan. I lay open, based on Psalm 25.
Open my whole life to you, trusting you, O Holy One. I lay open my whole life to you, trusting you, O Holy One. Open my whole life to you, trusting you, O Holy One. I lay open my whole life to you, trusting you, O Holy One. Open our whole lives to you, trusting you, O Holy One. We lay open our whole lives to you, trusting you, O Holy One.
And let us conclude this time with that beautiful Advent hymn, Come Thou Long Expected Jesus.
Come thou long expected Jesus, born to set thy people free from our fears and sins, release Jesus, let us find our rest in thee. Israel's strength and consolation, hope of all the earth thou art, dear desire of every nation, joy of every longing heart. Born thy people to deliver, born a child and yet a king, born to reign in us forever. Now thy gracious kingdom reign, by thine own eternal Spirit, rule in all our hearts alone. By thine all-sufficient merit, raise us to thy glory.